Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so very much for joining us for our second housing webinar for today. And first of all, I would like to thank our funder, the Secrétariat aux relations avec les Québécois d'expression anglaise, for the funding that has permitted us to produce these housing webinars. There will be a total of 8, and we're now on session number 4. And as I mentioned just briefly, we will be recording it, so your microphones will remain closed. We ask you, as you think of a question with each presenter, please write it in the chat box. Katia, our executive director, will be directing the questions to each presenter at the end of their presentation. So it's nice to be ready and Johnny on the spot to start the questions when it's question period. I'd like to thank everybody who's here and also to our 2 presenters who are donating their time to do this for us. So we really appreciate it. So without further ado from me, I'm going to introduce our first presenter, Sharon Sweeney, who is the project manager of the NDG Community Council. Sharon is a dedicated community activist with a passion for enhancing the lives of the vulnerable populations through sustainable housing solutions. As a collective impact project manager at the NDG Community Council, she brings over a decade of experience as a community organizer, diligently working to empower, prioritize neighborhoods, and create positive change. Currently pursuing her studies in urban planning at Concordia University in Montreal, Sharon's academic pursuits align with her practical experience. With a deep understanding of the intricate dynamics of urban spaces, she combines her knowledge with the real-world insights to tackle housing challenges head-on. Sharon's accomplishments include 6-year tenure as the president of Habitation Communautaire NDG, and nonprofit housing organization. Under her visionary leadership from 2017 to 2023, the organization thrived in its mission to provide safe and affordable housing to low-income residents. Having served as a community organizer in densely populated areas enriched with apartments and social housing, Sharon possesses a profound understanding of the needs and the rights of tenants. Her expertise in tenants' rights and her advocacy for fair housing practices has earned her a respected position in the field. And this afternoon, we're honored and pleased to have Sharon with us. And without further ado, Sharon, I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. I'm happy to be here and to talk about housing and or the process that has to take place when you want to renovate an older building. So I won't go too much into my history, but I have been on the board of directors with Habitation Communautaire NDG for 10 years, 6 of which I've been the president. And within the time that I've been at Habitation Communautaire, we have renovated and took over 3 projects. So we bought a building at the corner of Walkley and Côte Saint-Luc Road, 5365, 5375 Walkley. We've bought a building at the corner of Grand and Saint-Jacques, 2035 and 2045 Grand. And we also were almost given an opportunity to have a building in Côte Saint-Luc, 5620 and 5622 Emerald. So our organization has firsthand experience with renovating older buildings. It's a bit of a process, but it is doable. So I would say, you know, in today's market and the way that the housing market looks, and it looks quite bleak, to be honest, for a lot of people, that we prioritize families that live below the poverty level, seniors who are experiencing reduced income. And I think it's as community workers, advocates, I think it's our natural inclination to be an advocate, like you see an abandoned building and you cannot believe that it's abandoned and it's been there for 10 years and you want to have access to it. It's a bit of a process, and I'll walk you through the process. I am not the expert. I've done it. I'm basically telling you the steps that the government of Quebec tells us what to do, but of course with a personal anecdotal experience, because we've done it 3 times. So you are, I could very much give Tracie as an example. She's in the western end of NDG, and she goes to West Haven to do activities, and she sees that abandoned building on Elmhurst and she wants it. She thinks that she could have it. She wants it. She wants to be able to have housing for seniors. We're seeing elevators. We have it all mapped out in our mind. You can do it. You can do it. It just takes a bit of work. So I believe it is Robert who could share my slides if he likes. Yeah. So you're renovating an old building. So the first step is you've identified, or you've seen and you've identified a group of buildings that have been abandoned for quite some time, and you would like to have access to those buildings. That is something within the context of social housing and housing in Quebec, that is actually possible. It takes a bit of time to get to that point, but it is possible. You can start a project if you're a public agency. So if you're the CMHC, if you're affiliated with the CS or the CLSC, if you're a housing bureau, or if you're a not-for-profit organization who wishes to purchase the community housing. In order to be able to buy that building, so once you see an abandoned building, there are steps that need to take that are a little bit minutia, but you can easily contact your the role from your the role of to find out who owns the building. Usually when the building is abandoned, it's taken over by the City of Montreal or the SHQ, the Société Hébergement de Québec. So it's basically in this gray zone where you have an opportunity, you may have an opportunity to buy it as a not-for-profit organization. So if you are a not-for-profit organization, it would be well received if you were a social housing group. However, a not-for-profit group can buy housing, and in order for you to be able to buy it, you need to have support from your municipality. So you will have to start to, the not-for-profit has to make links with your municipality. You have to make links with those that are working in urban planning. You have to make links with your city councilors that work in your municipality. And if you're lucky, in NDG, we have a housing table, and at the borough, we have a comité de salubrité. So what you'll have to do is make links like that for people who are working on the terrain, for people who understand the challenges of housing. Your not-for-profit will need to make those types of links. You need to be a charitable organization, or oh, sorry, I made a mistake. Well, I already said you need to be a not-for-profit. So you need support from your municipality, and you could get once you have support from your municipality, it's not your regular process. You'll generally get a letter of recommendation, let's say, or a letter of support from your city councilor. You could get a letter of support from someone who's working in the urban planning department. You could acquire a number of letters of support if your municipality has seen that they believe your not-for-profit has the capacity to follow through with this project. And then at that point, once you have support from your municipality, you need to find financial assistance from the community. So the municipality will give you money, a public agency might give you money, a charitable organization, or you could do a public fundraising campaign. A philanthropic, you could have a seed campaign to get money for your housing project. Once you get to that point, the Accès Logis Québec program will help you start your housing project. So you could go to the next slide. So in order to execute your project, you're going to need, you put together a group of people, you have a not-for-profit, you have a solid relationship with your municipality, you have your letters of support, you think that you could have a successful fundraising campaign. So now you need to have, what you need to have is a GRT that will work with you. So the GRT is simply the Groupe Ressources Techniques. So they're basically the project managers that will execute your project. The GRTs in Quebec are, I could be wrong about this, but I think the GRTs in Quebec, all of the GRTs in Quebec are not-for-profits. And they're there to help facilitate, to make sure that we could make this project happen. I know a lot about housing. I don't know how to build housing. I don't know how to make sure everything's okay. I don't know any of that part. These are your GRT is the group that you work with. If anybody here is at a point where they feel like our group actually can buy, housing has been identified, you feel like you could buy it, you feel like you could get seed money and get support of the municipality, the GRT is a component that's a little bit not sneaky, it's tricky. You just need to find out which GRT is working on your terrain. So you could, there are different groups. Rommel is a housing organization. They are also a GRT. Gérer son quartier is a GRT, and Group CDH is a GRT. So you make a connection with Mr. Tracie from CDH, and you want them to be your GRT. That may not happen. They may not be on the train that you're in. So there's a few steps that need to happen. You need to familiarize yourself with what's happening on the train of your area or your municipality. So your GRT, you may not have the choice of GRTs to work with, or you may be in a train like Park X where there's 4 different GRTs and you do have a choice because they all have the right to work on the train. Okay, we could go to the next slide. All projects, okay, so the eligibility of your project. All projects must include the purchase of land or a building or both at the same time. So your project could be renovations of an existing housing, transformation, recycling of a non-residential building into housing. That's an enormous project. Construction of new housing or acquisition of a building in very good condition with a useful life of approximately 25 years, which does not require major renovations. Eligible projects are chosen through an ongoing process based on the availability of fundings from the government of Quebec. You could go to the next slide. So when it's the one that says clientele targeted, yeah. So when you're doing your project, what's going to come with your housing project, your not-for-profit housing project, is going to be you're going to have an envelope of money that helps this project come to fruition. So there's 3 volets in housing. Volet 1 is, so when you're getting your money to be a not-for-profit housing, when you're getting your money from the government of Quebec, you have the opportunity to have subsidized housing. That's usually how it works when you're building your housing. So if volet 1, I don't know the translation of the word volet, maybe component 1. So component 1 is just regular permanent housing. So you buy a building and 25% of your housing is going to be volet 1. What that means is 25% of the people in your building meet the criteria of subsidized housing, which the criteria is generally, it's the low income threshold. So 25% of your housing could be subsidized. Volet 2 is housing with services for elderly people with a slight loss of autonomy. So the organizations that have Volet 2 funding, for example, would be Chez Soi. And people are always quite surprised when they say, you could move into this housing, you have to be 75 years and over, you have to be functionally autonomous, and they're not, this type of housing, Volet 2, is not for older people who must rely on services. You really need to be independent. So I kind of highlighted the Volet 2 because it's, I believe it's one of the things within the government of Quebec that I think that we could make changes around, because often I don't know the profile of people who are 75 years and over, but often if someone's 75, maybe in 10 years, the geriatric profile starts to, like a lot of difficulties arise. So the model of housing with the Volet 2 is you're starting off with a tenant that's likely not going to be your tenant, that who knows, maybe that 75-year-old person is going to be autonomous until they're 95. I don't know the statistics around that, but I do know that the organizations that have this type of funding have been advocating to have that age lowered so that the housing becomes much more sustainable. If you're going into housing where you're subsidized at 65 years of age, 65, you've just tacked on 10 more years to your autonomy. And that's much more sustainable for somebody who's managing a building. So Volet 2, I highlight that not only because this is Seniors Action Quebec, but I mean, as advocates, as Wynne is here with us, it's something that I think needs to be discussed and needs to be challenged. And can the government considering lowering it to 70 years old or 65 years old? Because it really does make it, for the management companies and for the housing, not as sustainable as you would like. You want people to be permanent. You don't want to take someone in, and at 75, that might be difficult for families to get to that point, to help their parents move into a place. And then 10 or 15 years later, they're going to have to do it again. It's like just a little bit more longevity. So that's why I highlighted that, because this is the scope of Seniors Action Quebec. And I think it would be really helpful if that number was lowered. So that is Volet 2, and Volet 2 is specific for 75 years and over. You could have housing Volet 3. Volet 3 is housing for people with special housing needs. It's pretty, so the Volet 3 is pretty all-encompassing. It could be somebody with, who has experienced challenges with keeping a home, who's at risk of homelessness, someone who needs psychosocial support. There's a level of, the Volet 3 is trying to help people regain a level of autonomy that they didn't have and reintegrate them into housing. Volet 3 is a fantastic stream of funding for housing, because often when you have Volet 3, Volet 1, the first one, it's only 25% of your units are subsidized. If you have a Volet 3, you can have your whole housing unit could be subsidized. It doesn't have to be disability. It could be as specific as women going to school with children under 5. Like there's a lot of different components to Volet 3. It's just reintegrating people back into housing. You could go to the next slide. Okay, so the financial assistance that's granted when you're trying to build your housing project is granted under the Accès Logis Quebec program, and it could take different forms. So subsidies for carrying out a project corresponding to 50% of the eligible cost recognized by the SHQ, additional subsidies under certain conditions, subsidies for disabled people, for home adaptation, and for innovative projects. So if you have an innovative idea, you might be able to get additional funding. Subsidies paid to an organization in the form of a rent supplement, and guarantee on an organization's mortgage loan. So what we have is the group that I'm the president of. We have the subsidies for carrying out a project, and we get 50% of the eligible costs recognized by the SHQ. However, we do own one building that is completely volet trois, and I think that we have more than 50% covered. Our the organization's mortgage is guaranteed. So for example, we had a lot of difficulty in COVID and our residents had a lot of difficulty. We could not make the mortgage payment. So now our mortgage payments from 2020, let's say 4 months are tacked on to the end of our mortgage. So, you know, I don't know what that comes out to be amortized over time and rates of exchange changing, but you're not, when you buy an old building and you do it under the Logiaction program, you're not alone. You're not alone. And that's why they make sure that you have your GRT. They make sure that you have the support of your municipality and other elected officials or other institutions, but you're not going to be alone. Like if the project ends up being like, oh my goodness, we did not anticipate how difficult that was going to be, you're not alone. That is one thing, is that the government of Quebec has put in a lot of, I guess, safety, not even a safety net, safety, like, yeah, safety net for the organizations that are offering this form of housing. So just to let you know, it's you have support. Rent after completion of the project. The economic rent provided for the lease the tenants must pay is between 75 and 95% of the median market rent, which is recognized by the SHQ. So median rent is the average cost of housing in a given area. So this is another, I should have highlighted this like I did 75 years and over. So your median rent, my median rent in the middle of NDG, I don't know it off the top of my head, but it could be $1,600 for a 2-bedroom apartment or $1,400 for a 2-bedroom apartment. So if you buy an apartment building as a not-for-profit and only 25% of your units are subsidized, you need to charge 75 to 95% of the market. So I'm just gonna do the math. I should have done that before. 14% times 75%. So I would be charging $1,050 month rent, let's say, for a 2-bedroom apartment for a building that was abandoned, which sometimes indicates that it might be in an area that's a little bit impoverished. And $1,050 for a 2-bedroom does sound good, but it's not necessarily viable for people who are living in lower income communities. And so that is another point of contention, the 75 to 95% and the median market, which advocates and Logiaction and Project Chance and all of us fight for, because the government is basing the median rent in a given market based on what the market can bear. It's not based on what is affordable to me or you, it's based on what the market could bear. So in NDG, for example, rents are astronomical because there are people who are willing to pay that rent and be in this neighborhood and sometimes really not have a lot of extra money. So we continue to, and this is why I'm happy to present here, is that 75 to 95% of the median market needs to be challenged, because it's not based on what people are earning, it's based on what the market could bear. It's basically based on what landlords are charging and what tenants are willing to pay. So it really does almost negates that we are one of the United Nations countries and housing is a right. You know, housing is a right. When you give the landlords that much weight, it appears to me like our government is not recognizing that housing is a right. So the next step is carrying out a project. So I guess at the end of it is, are you an eligible organization? Municipality, GRTs are able to carry out the projects. architect, engineer, notary, carrying out a project. Can you do it? And what steps do you need to be able to do it? And you can evaluate that for yourselves, and you could start reaching out to people and making connections. In order to buy a building, I'll be honest, it probably takes about 3-4 years to get yourself to that point that you'd be able to buy a building if you were a not-for-profit organization. But it is a model that's been laid out for us, and it is worth tapping into the funds that are available to be able to do this. And that's it. You're on mute. You're on mute, Ruth.
Sorry about that. Sharon, thank you ever so much for that. I'm not sure if people have had the opportunity to put their questions in the chat box. Do we have any, Katia? If not, I'm going to ask Sharon if she would touch upon something else.
We've got one, so if you want to go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so people, if you have questions or you need more information on something that Sharon has brought up, or a concept you're aware of, please put it in the chat box. Now, Sharon, I know you also have some expertise, and since we're dealing with housing, and we do have about 10 minutes more that we could get some information from you. And I don't think I'm putting you on the spot, honestly, because I know you know it inside and out. One of the other areas, and we don't have a specific housing webinar on this topic, so I'm going to seize the opportunity of having your expertise, if you don't mind. Could you talk a little bit and sensitize people and inform them if they have what their rights are and what they can do about renovictions?
Okay, so the first thing I think that people could do with regards to renovictions, and as community workers, advocates, as people who are out there on the train or might have access to people who are faced with renovictions, the biggest thing you could do for anybody who's dealing with a renoviction is education. Make sure that they are well aware of their rights. You're not putting me on the spot. I just don't know. I know I have a document. I don't know the exact particulars, but for example, I'm going to say 75. I could be wrong. If someone is 75 years old, pardon, 70? Okay, if someone is 70 and has been living in their residence, is there a time limit, or is it just if a 70-year-old tenant?
I believe it is 10 years.
10 years, yeah, that's it. So if they're 70 years old and they've been living in their lodging for 10 years, they cannot be evicted, they cannot be renovicted. I can't buy the house for me and my family and just think I could take over. They have rights, they are entitled to stay there. If someone's going to be renovicted and the landlord jumps through all the hoops and tries to convince the TAL that this is actually going to be a renovation. So there are very specific criteria where people can be renovicted. It has to be like extreme and total, you know, gutting, mold. You cannot live where you're living, number one. Number two, they are changing their building from, let's say, a 2-bedroom to a 4-bedroom. They're joining 2 units together. I'm not even sure. In fact, I'm going to say I'm sure that if your resident is a senior, they cannot be evicted under those circumstances. So what you got to do is you have to remind and support and find the, you know, the intervenants and the people on the ground who are ready to support your seniors and the people that you're working with, because they do not have the right to evict them. If your person that you're supporting is amenable to being evicted and has options, they have to fight the landlord as hard as they can, because there are instances where it's not status quo, but there are instances where people are winning $40,000 and $50,000 because it doesn't matter It doesn't matter, you know, if I'm paying $800 and my landlord gives me $10,000, that $10,000 is gone tomorrow when you think about the increase of rent. So it's just supporting and being there for the people that you know, and make sure that you have access to the tools. So the simple ones that I think we all use is 211. So 211.qc.ca helps you get to the housing group in your neighborhood. And then you just have to be, it's really difficult, but the senior needs either support of a community worker or a family member, because you just have to be very insistent that if they're amenable to leaving, they have to be reimbursed, because what the landlord is going to receive once you're evicted is going to be more than that $40,000 over the course of, you know, over the course of 10 years or 15 years. And that's why we got to fight to try to get those $30,000 and $25,000 wins, to tell the landlord, oh, guess what? It's actually not worth it. It's not worth it to go to this effort, because you're going to get caught and you're going to have to compensate your tenant.
Just before we go to the questions, is there a process, like if somebody is given a notice or told by their landlord, well, we're renovating the building, we're changing it, so we're not going to be renewing your lease. Is it like a regular tenant? They have so many days in which to say, I disagree with your, I don't accept what you're offering me? And they have to respond by registered mail, Sharon?
I'm just looking to see where I might have put that information.
I would assume that
So-
there's something in the law that the tenant can at least make their objections known.
So it's a weird law where it's so it's incumbent on the landlord to make sure that you're aware that you want to leave and you're going to agree to this. But it's this weird little gray area where if you don't answer, that means you have refused. I would never in a million years ever advise somebody not to answer. I would answer immediately and say, I do not approve of these terms and conditions, and send it back to the landlord registered mail. I believe 10 days is fair, but I would do it immediately and make sure that's in writing. And not having to reply to me is counterintuitive. It doesn't make any sense. So I would reply regardless.
I would back you
reply
100% on that, because at least your objection is on the record and registered mail. Okay, I think we're catching up okay. Katia, I'm going to turn it over to you now for questions.
Okay. Hey, Sharon, thanks for taking the time and for hanging out with us on a Friday afternoon. It's greatly appreciated, even though it's cold out.
Thank you.
I think the first question I had was, what type of abandoned buildings can not-for-profits acquire? Are churches a go, or churches are a no-no?
Churches are a go. You can transform a building that was not housing to housing. So
Okay.
churches are a go. It's just, it just depends on who owns it. You know, like it's the gray area of where it's sitting. So an apartment building that's abandoned and the landlord lives in Italy and is never coming back, and every family member isn't here, the SHQ will take over that because it's housing. Whereas, so the SHQ in their possession, if not in their periphery, whereas a church wouldn't belong to the SHQ.
No, that'd be the archdiocese, so that's a whole other
Yeah,
thing.
exactly. So it's a whole, it's a whole other thing. So it's not as easy. Yeah.
Okay. And And just off the top of your head, do you know if there are loads of abandoned buildings in and around the Montreal area that are just sitting there and people could acquire
There's
and
a,
how?
there's a lot. There's a
Yeah.
lot. So what we're trying to do in NDG, and I think other municipalities are trying to do that, is we're trying to get the municipalities to give the housing advocates the information about which buildings, because there is a strange delay of, okay, this building is abandoned and now it's sitting there not owned by anybody. The SHQ will kind of take possession of it.
Mhm.
And there's a gray area of when a not-for-profit could buy that. And what all of the housing groups are working on is trying to get their municipalities to make sure that the housing organizations and at least the advocacy groups know which buildings are up for grabs before the developers
Grab them.
grab them. Yeah.
Okay. And so normally what's the kind of time frame for a not-for-profit to acquire and shift, I like that word, and shift these buildings into social housing or housing? Well,
So we actually, from my experience, we were quite lucky. We got three sets of buildings, one after the other, where I actually think it was a case where the landlords didn't live here. They wanted to sell it. They wanted to sell them for whatever they could get. They were finished with being Canada or whatever. So we managed to buy those buildings successively and quite quickly. But if you're looking at, let's say the Project Chance that's on Cavendish, that was a not-for-profit, that was social housing for young moms, that might take that could be anywhere from 18 months to 5 years
oh wow.
to sort through all of that. So that's why it's good, if somebody was interested in this model, is really start, either join a housing committee, joining housing table, start working in this direction, because all of those steps take a number of years to get to the point where the municipality and the government is going to say, okay, you can do this.
Okay. And for the most part, how are you feeling? Are you feeling satisfied with the City of Montreal's plans to purchase land or older buildings for housing?
Satisfied?
Is that the right word?
Let me think. Are there any city employees here?
No, you're
here.
you're good.
I don't think it's a true thing. I think it's words.
Okay.
I think it's words. I have not seen any substantive real action from any government. I think it's words. And if you were, actually, I know it's words, because if you're going to call them on it, they're going to tell you, oh no, but it's the provincial government that has the right to do that. And if you call the provincial government on it, the provincial government's going to say, oh, that's the SHQ or that's the OMHM. And if you go to the CMHC is going to see the money trickle back to the provincial government. So no, I think it's words, and until I see it, I don't believe it.
Okay.
I'm sorry to sound so bitter.
No, I mean, there we go. Oh, Ruth, yeah, do you want to say something, Ruth?
Oh, when you're finished with the questions, I have a little surprise that I'm going to throw us off our routine.
Oh, okay.
So you go ahead with the questions if there are any more.
Okay, no problem. It's all good. So I know you're based in NDG, but do you know of any other areas in the province where they've done? I think I've done. I saw Ruth reacted. Any other regions in the province where they have, acquired older abandoned buildings and made them into housing projects?
But I don't. I'm sure I might. I probably do if I think about it, but
I know, sorry, it's on the spot.
So that's the funny thing about the work that we do in NDG. It really is specific to NDG, so I'm very focused on what happens in NDG. Yeah. So no, I don't know. I'm sure there are, but I don't know.
Okay, I think at this point, this is where I'm going to jump in. Sharon, thank you so very, very much. That was very informative, and I can see it's a massive undertaking, but we're very pleased that we have in our audience today. And this is a rare exception because we normally don't take somebody from the audience and open up the mic because we lose timing and keeping on schedule. She's also going to be a presenter in January for us. But that is Kate Kotler, who is the president of the Villa Marie, Villa Beaurepaire project. And she has been instrumental and the founder of the Villa Marie Villa Marie. God, I guess the city of Montreal has got me in the brain or something.
Ruth, you just have to unmute yourself. You muted yourself.
Okay, she's the president of the Villa Beaurepaire project that was a success, but also she is currently working on something new for the area of Beaconsfield. So, oh, there, I see her. Kate, if you want to tell us what you've been up to lately and the process that you've had to go through, I think is what we want. Don't scoop my January webinar too much.
No.
And thank you for doing this and welcome.
Yeah, sorry. I don't want to take any time away from Sandra's presentation. Thank you, Sandra, for that presentation. Villa Beaurepaire is a nonprofit seniors residence that was built under the Accès Logis program that Sandra mentioned. So we have 50 apartments in Beaconsfield, and those apartments are for autonomous and semi-autonomous seniors with no care services. We started the project I'm not sure who was talking about timelines for building projects. We started the project 13 years ago. It took us 3 attempts to get the funding from the SHQ, from the Accès Logis program. And on the 3rd attempt, we started construction, and we finished construction 10 years ago. So we just celebrated our 10th year anniversary. And now I've set up a second board, and that second board, using the banner or the charter of Villa Beaurepaire, the nonprofit, we made an offer to purchase on a church that we are connected to, who are the actual founders of the original Villa Beaurepaire. So VB Plus, we've made funding to a program called the FAC. So I don't know why Accès Logis is still on the website of the SHQ. I just looked at it because Accès Logis doesn't exist anymore. The SHQ scrapped it and they replaced it with a program called FAC. It's an acronym which is PHAQ, the Programme d'Habitation Abordable Québec. Unfortunately, that program does not include subsidies, rent subsidies. So it's basically a funding for just the bricks and mortar for nonprofit housing. It's really a shame, and I have to say more bluntly that the government is definitely not doing enough for affordable housing, especially since the program Accès Logis was cut. Anyway, the FAC has a deadline, which was the end of September. I don't know if there's going to be another call for proposals from the SHQ next year. We got in at the end of September, and we won't know until January if our project has been approved. We have an $8.5 million project, and it's going to be different than Villa Beaurepaire in that it will be for assisted living. So it will be 24 units, and we will be demolishing the church next door, only because it's full of asbestos, which is very common in churches built in the 50s. But we're not the only nonprofit that has and will adapt churches. And it's a negotiation process with a church to purchase a church, and all depends on who owns the church, of course, like Sandra said. Anyway, I just wanted to mention those few things, that it is very doable. I used to work for Group CDH, by the way, and built about 15 nonprofit housing projects in the West Island. So it helps when you know the steps to take, but you absolutely have to have a GRT. You need to get in touch with the GRT if you want to build a project. They do a lot of the legwork and they have the knowledge. That's it.
Thank you so much, Kate. And that's just a little teaser for people who want to sign up for the January webinar, because Kate will be doing much more. So I thank you for that additional information, because it's very complex and we don't deal with it on a day-to-day basis. The more information we have, the better. Sharon, thank you so very much. I know you've been under the weather for almost 2 weeks, and we really appreciate you doing this for us today. Great information, so thank you very much. And now we're going into our next part of this webinar, which is intergenerational opportunities. And I'm sure there are many there, and we may only skim the surface, but we're hoping that it's going to trigger thoughts, discussions, ideas, and maybe springboard into something very practical and create new options for people out there who are dealing with housing crisis. So it's my pleasure to introduce Tracie Swim. And Tracie coordinates family volunteer visits and the award-winning intergenerational programming for Montreal West United Church Extra Miles Seniors Visiting Program. She is the founding member and the director of WIN, Intergenerational Network. Her focus is to reduce the isolation of older adults, increase their sense of connectedness to the community and their sense of value and worthiness to build a stronger community. Tracie has been working in partnership with Engage, Concordia Center for Research on Aging. She also serves as a community representative on the Engage Advisory Board and has been a collaborative on the FRQS Intersectional Living Lab project, Engage Creative Living at Lab, fostering community engagement of older adults in archives and research in Cavendish Mall in Montreal. And that's been online during COVID-19. She is proud of her role as a member of the Town of Montreal West, Municipalité Aimée des Aînés, MADA, Steering Committee, and the Montreal West Seniors Advisory Committee, assisting with Montreal West's goal to be an aging-friendly community. Today, Tracie is going to talk to us about intergenerational opportunities. And without further ado, Tracie, thank you once again for doing this. I know your schedule's as crazy as all the other presenters, and really appreciate you giving us this time on a Friday afternoon. So I'm turning it right over to you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Ruth. And yeah, everyone's schedules have been absolutely crazy. Rob, you're more than welcome to put up the slides. I just want to say a big thank you to you, Ruth, and to Seniors Action Quebec for making this space available for the important conversations, including this one about intergenerational living opportunities. In the current environment, it is important to explore the alternative living models. And today we'll explore the benefits of intergenerational living, the current trends in intergenerational living models, examples, and look at the selected available resources. Before getting to the heart of the conversation, you'll hear about WIN, Intergenerational Network, and to get into the spirit of the conversation, I'll share a couple of thoughts, maybe more than a couple of thoughts, about isolation and loneliness and the term intergenerational living. Please note, I am not an expert in intergenerational living models. I have a very general understanding of what's available out there. We can go to the next slide. So the WIN Intergenerational Network started in 2017 with the support of co-founder Miranda Potts, Montreal West United Church's Extra Miles Senior Visiting Program, Prévention, Côte-des-Neiges NDG, and of Engage Concordia University Center for Research on Aging, and the Eva Marsden Center. What's our mission? It's to spread the word about intergenerational practices. How does WIN do it? Well, we're all about collaboration. We bring together people, from the grassroots organizations to public institutions, and really everyone in between. We learn about other organizations' programs within our own circles and in other sectors. We pool our knowledge and resources, which inspires the development of programs or tweaks existing programs, encouraging connections between people from different age groups. We are about asking, what are we already doing that we can do a little differently? And here's the fun part. WIN's not just talk. WIN supports all sorts of initiatives, from story time and holiday cards to garden planting, bringing older adults into the classroom, and pen pal projects are just some of the examples. WIN is a place where organizations and groups come together to connect, share, learn, and build something great together, where everyone brings something special to the table. We can move on to that next slide that we were glancing at. Thanks a lot, Rob. Here are some of the thoughts to kick off the conversation. Fact: we group people by age. Yes, like age silos. As we age, oftentimes there are fewer chances for us to connect with other age groups. With Canada's aging population, there is a higher percentage of older adults who live on their own without much support, especially in Sharon, Sweeney's and my area. Social isolation is a health risk. It can have significant, as we've all heard, it can have significant negative effects on mental health and the overall well-being for people of all ages. Social isolation and loneliness affects, did you know this, almost half of Canadians, in particular, especially older adults and younger people. Yes, at a higher rate than the general population. Here's the twist. There are some surprising predictors for a long, healthy life. It is not just about going to the gym. The top predictors of a long, healthy life are your close connections and social integration. Yes, it is about chatting with people and building those bonds. Face-to-face contact, did you know, releases neurotransmitters that foster trust, can reduce stress, kill pain, and induce pleasure. Before moving on to the next slide, did you catch that having a flu shot is a stronger predictor for a long, healthy life than exercise? We can go to the next slide. When we say intergenerational, we're talking about bringing people from different age groups together. So what do we mean by intergenerational living? Everyone has their take on it. Some people see it as having grandparents, parents, and children all under one roof, sharing everything from chores to life experiences. What we typically know is, or have heard, as multi-generational living. Others see it as boarders and lodgers. And then there are those who see it as something a little bigger than that. It's encompassing intentional communities where people of different ages decide to live together, realizing the benefits of shared connections, resources, and wisdom. For us, for today, intergenerational living or housing is about people from different age groups living together in shared spaces and creating spaces where meaningful connections can happen. It's not just about sharing a roof. It can be a lifestyle, encouraging meaningful support and interactions across the age spectrums. It's building community where the strengths of each age group complement one another. It's more than just a bed. It's about sharing and supporting each other and building those social connections. Next slide. So now why bother with intergenerational living? Well, it's like a recipe for an all-round better life, or it can be, for everyone involved. Imagine a daily dose of sharing and mutual assistance between the generations. First off, intergenerational living can support social integration. And depending on the model, it can be part of the solution for labor and housing shortages. Imagine this, a win-win-win situation where affordable housing opportunities and financial benefits abound. Older adults get a boost in income, while the younger people enjoy reduced rent and shared expenses. Feeling more secure is another plus. It lets older adults age in place, getting a helping hand with stuff like computers and taking out the garbage, perhaps. But it's not just about the practicalities. It can be a social goldmine. These social connections, a tight-knit community, and emotional support. I think that's pretty priceless. And something else about intergenerational living, the transfer of knowledge, skills, experiences, and wisdom between generations is like having a living library where everyone gets a chance. Everyone gets a chance to pick up some useful life tips. Oh, and did I mention it's good for the planet too? Shared resources and spaces mean less environmental impact. Another gain for everyone and the planet. Next slide. Thanks, Rob. Okay, then we've talked about social integration. We've defined intergenerational living and highlighted some of the benefits of intergenerational living. So what are some of the intergenerational living opportunities? What is happening out there? If we go to the next slide, Rob, we can see some of the models. There's some interesting models that look at the different preferences and needs when it comes to intergenerational living. First up, you've got your classics, multi-generational homes, at granny pods. Yes, that's a real thing. And tiny homes could be another option. Now for other models. Have you heard of co-housing? It's kind of like matchmaking for homes. An older adult with a spare room gets matched with a younger person. What's the deal? The younger person offers practical or social support. Support like housekeeping, odd jobs, running errands, sharing meals, or going on outings, to name just a few. This is done in exchange for good quality and affordable accommodation. And get this, there are different sorts of arrangements. There are arrangements for reasonable rent, or there can be arrangements made for reduced rent, reduced from the reasonable rent, or even rent-free. As you can tell from that, there are various combinations and permutations of the co-housing models, and usually an agency is involved. Next up, have you heard about students living in assisted living residences for older adults? No? Okay. In this situation, students get free room and board in exchange for volunteer hours. So this is where you can have a win-win-win situation. Students get a place to live, and older adults get some extra company, and the residents extra eyes and a set of hands. We'll look at one model that's actually happening that I know of in the province here. There's actually a couple of models that I'm aware of. One's in Saint-Sacrement in Quebec City. And then there's another one called Les Marmonniers in, I believe it's Three Rivers, but we'll get to that afterwards. One of the things I find really exciting as well about this model is that, or for this model, it's exciting for this model, is that Quebec is starting to make a thing of it. The Secrétariat à la Jeunesse just released a funding opportunity for student accommodation projects in assisted living residences for seniors here in Quebec. So that's really exciting for the youth as well as for the older adults. It's really nice when we can all come together. In this model, I just wanted to make special mention of an alternative model that I heard about the other day at the Yukon University. The residence complex there is also home to Indigenous elders and their families. From what I've told, it's a unique blend of wisdom and youthful energy, and the opportunities to learn from each other. I know that the elders there make themselves available, whether it's special occasions or they'll just be in the lounges and open for conversations with the students. Just wanted to make special mention of that. Another type of model is imagining, how can you imagine daycares or classes happening in residences, assisted living residences for older adults? That's bringing together generations for shared experiences. It is happening in several places. It's a lot of places in the UK have this going, and Quebec has announced its interest in developing this further here as well. And let's not forget about Indigenous communities. Indigenous communities have an ingrained vision for intergenerational living that has not been lost. They have a deep-rooted cultural tradition emphasizing community and shared responsibility. It is not just about living under the same roof. The communal living model is about being there for each other and passing down wisdom through the ages. So that was briefly touching on some of the models. And as I mentioned, if we can see the next slide, for the co-housing models, and now even we've even seen instances for the students living in residence models, that there are processes for matching the two parties. But these processes still to date, from what I've seen, vary widely among the different organizations who act as, I'll say, intermediaries. Some pre-screen and match participants, while others limit themselves to keeping a registry of the rooms for rent. I just wanted to touch on that. Basically, that could be a whole other discussion, as is probably every part of this presentation. We can move to the next slide, Rob. So I thought we'd dive into a couple of examples here. So here is some pictures of students living in an assisted living residence for older adults. I talked about this just a little bit earlier. For this program, it's at the Résidence des Marronniers, which is in Trois-Rivières. The students live rent-free in exchange for 10 volunteer hours, for which they receive training and they are monitored by a member of the staff. The volunteer hours could, among other things, include sharing a meal in the dining room, playing board games, piano and singing, outings, or a visit to a resident experiencing a difficulty or illness. And this is just a small list of all the potentials. But you can see how this can help the older adult, how it can be beneficial to the student, as well as the residents, and change the atmosphere within the residence. The next model here on the other page supports, this is an example here of an older adult sharing a room in her home with a younger person. 34-year-old Ben was matched with 84-year-old Winnie by Share and Care Home Share. This is an organization in the UK, United Kingdom, that pairs people who need a room with people who need some help around the house. This program requires that the sharers spend about 15 hours a week together. But Ben says the hours go out the window and it is more spontaneous. Rob, here's where we'll let Ben tell the story with this short video.
Hello, I'm Ben Aiken, a diabetic Aquarius from Portsmouth and the author of The Marmalade Diaries, which is not a book about marmalade. It's in the title because I consumed it each morning during one of the strangest years of my life. It was one of the strangest years of my life because for the most part I spent it with a recently widowed 85-year-old. I moved in with Winnie because she had a spare room and needed a hand around the house, or several. I needed a room and could lend said hand. What neither of us needed was a strict and protracted national lockdown to commence 10 days after my moving in. If I'd known what was around the corner, I would have stayed put. For the next year or so, Winnie and I more or less resembled a newlywed couple, minus the consent and passion. Think of an intergenerational version of Big Brother, but with only two housemates. One a grieving and inflexible former aristocrat in her 80s, the other a working class snowflake millennial. What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go right? Quite a lot, as it turned out. We did most of our chatting at breakfast, in this kitchen, at this table. It was over marmalade that Winnie told me about her life. It was over marmalade that she shared with me some life lessons. Heat the red wine in the oven, with the plates, for example. Try not to miss any episodes of Gardener's World. And never throw anything away, even a 6-month-old leek discovered at the back of the cupboard. As far as Winnie's concerned, things are never past their best. They just become best at something else. But it wasn't just red wine and leeks and Monty Don. I learned a thing or two about grief, about fear, about family, about home, about nature, about care, and about love. This book is a record of our unlikely cohabitation. It's also the hardest book I've written. I'm used to writing about many people, many places. This is one person, one place. But when things don't change, you look harder, you look deeper. In the specific lies the universal, in one person, all people. That's how I feel anyway. The cohabitation lasted until July 4th, 2021, when Winnie fell in the garden and broke her hip and pelvis. I came back about 10 p.m, having been at the pub watching the football, believing she was in bed. It was only because I opened my bedroom window to have a crafty cigarette that I could hear her crying for help. It's unlikely she'll live in this house again. Her home of 60 years, no more. That's a sad note to finish on, but this isn't a sad book. Like marmalade, it's bittersweet, and I look forward to sharing it with you.
I'd be interested to in any comments on what you thought. It's not about the book, it's about the living arrangements and, you know, how the attitudes, it was very clear how the attitude shifted, and they really had fun together. Or they made space for each other too. So we could go to the next slide. Those are just a couple of examples. There's so many different examples of different living opportunities. Here are just a selected few resources here. We've got the CMHC, information on housing. MATA, the age-friendly municipalities and cities, has housing guides and tools. That's for in Quebec, it would be in French. Munitoi is a newer platform, and it's a housing platform for older adults. And they'll talk about the different bits about of types of housing there. We talked about Canada. I mentioned briefly Canada Home Share. They work to match older adult home providers with students. They are primarily situated in Edmonton, Kingston, Vancouver, parts of Ontario, including Toronto. And here in Quebec, I know of one organization called Intergenerational, and they match older adults who have a spare room with a student. And again, they, like we were talking in co-housing, they support the different models that can be used in terms of determining what the rent will be. And finally, you know, keep an eye out for Intergenerational Quebec. In addition to different resources for intergenerational programming and projects, they're also working on a book about intergenerational shared living. And I want to thank them. First of all, we've had some conversations about today's project, and they're expecting this book to come out hopefully in 2024, 2025. Finally, to conclude, intergenerational living brings practical advantages and a sense of shared experience. And as you've seen, very, you know, we've had sort of the top of it, it does promote a richer and healthier and more connected community. What do you think?
Thank you so very, very much, Tracie. Absolutely. It's heartwarming. I like hearing these stories and the opportunities. I was fortunate enough to have a young student from Poland with me for close to 4 years before I moved out to Vaudreuil, and it was a marvelous, marvelous experience, and he's become part of the family. So without more comments from me, Katia, do we have some questions for Tracie? Katia frozen?
It seems
Andrew,
to be.
did you see any questions come in?
Katia is frozen, and I don't see any they may have been directly messaged to Katia. If anybody has any questions, put them in. Oh, Katia's back. There she is.
Yeah, sorry, my internet is being absolutely evil today. I have no idea what's going on, and I'm about to call the internet company to yell at them.
I want to thank Laurent. I see that Laurent put the link in
Yes.
for the new funding opportunity.
Yes, he did. Katia, you were
Sorry
saying?
for interrupting.
Yeah, I was just going to start jumping in with questions. There's no questions in the chat, but I've got a few in my head. The first one being, Tracie, did you get your flu shot?
Believe it or not, I did.
Okay.
Did you?
Yes, I did actually. Yes, I did. I'm set. So my first question is, it's a bit of an abstract one, but who do you think benefits the most out of intergenerational living? The seniors or the youngsters?
You know, having been involved in intergenerational practice and programming for many years, everyone, there's not a most, you know, again, it depends on the situation. It depends on the people. It really does. I mean, we don't walk out of any programming or any event or without, you know, a younger person and an older person making, you know, some statement. They're surprised that the other person, whether it's a young that listens to them, that they want to have a conversation with them. You know, I've had younger people say, oh, they do want to talk with me. This has been great. And then the same with the older person. There's always that hesitancy at the beginning, and the surprise and the motivation coming out of these types of things. With intergenerational living, I guess the hardest part, and Ben touched on this, is when it comes to the end of the program. right? Because people that are boarding don't always board for long term. However, a lot of people stay in touch and connected in other ways.
So that was my next question, because if these programs only last a year or two, and then the lodger, boarder, younger person has to leave, then what happens? Does someone else just replace the person that left, and then that person that left has to go and find other housing situations, or?
Okay, so basically there's from my understanding with co-housing and how it works, there's usually an intermediary, an organization that can match the two people. And it depends on the arrangements that the two people come to. They might want to extend the arrangement beyond the school years. That doesn't always happen, because if you're renting, usually you're coming in from out of town. So it's up to the person that has the space as to whether or not they want to maybe make the space available to somebody else. What I've been told by people that are intermediaries is, again, like we said, it's hard when it comes to an end, but more often than not, the two stay connected. The sharers stay connected in some ways. So like Ruth was saying, right? It's like the person that she had living with them, they've become like a part of the family.
And that wasn't done through an organization. It was done through my landlady knowing a great aunt from walking dogs together, who had a nephew from Poland who was desperate for housing. And so I was her tenant, and they came over and we got along, and he moved in. He was there for almost the 4 years and was tremendous help, because at that point I was having joints replaced. So he came in handy putting garbage out and things like that. He had a place to stay, was company for each other. And he ended up, when he finished his studies, working for my youngest daughter in her same company as her, and for years. And now his sister is here in Canada. He's moved on and bought a house and in another company, and sister is living with him. But we still get together, the whole family, as family events. So it was marvelous.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Yeah, sure, you can do it on your own. So, but what this affords you by having an intermediary, or things to think about, is you have the different in the co-housing levels of living together. You can, when you're renting out a room, it's obviously less than the market value that Sharon was speaking about, right? So you have that. So you can have somebody come in, share your kitchen, they do their things and you do your thing. There is still a benefit there for both parties, because they're still sharing a space. They are going to interact. So that goes back to social integration, right? However, you got the other different models where you can get a further reduced rent in exchange for assisting in the place that you're living with. So there's another video that I found after the fact, but Canada Home Share, that a young woman moved in with an older woman. She was going to university, and what the older woman wanted, needed help with her computer. So there was an exchange of services for that. And then, they did outings together and help with the garbage, right? And part of their agreement is that, there was 7 hours, or I'll say 7 or 10 hours a week of volunteer hours. She paid a reduced rent. And the other model where, you could potentially get free rent, where the model could be in terms of a contract is, you get the free rent. The person that's moving in commits to X amount of hours of volunteer work, but also commits to being there for, let's say, 6 meals a week. So for students, also, but you get every second weekend off, and or every second or 2 weekends away where you don't have to commit, and one night during the week as well. And then, you know, you have to work in school holidays and maybe exams, and it becomes more fluid, but it's always good when, especially when you're getting to those reduced levels in exchange for services, to have a contract. But definitely, Ruth, you go back to the boarder, lodger, roomer kind of thing, you know, of course it can be done on your own. What we find, there's a lot of hesitancy, and it's trying to figure out how to help older adults feel comfortable inviting people into their home in these type of models. But they're very important, and can offer they offer so many benefits. You know, an engaged person is going to be a healthier person. Reduce costs on the medical system. We could go on. It's yeah, it's extremely.
No, that's great. And I'm gonna let Andrew ask his question because he just read my mind, so that's kind of freaking me out. But I'll let him ask.
Go for it.
I was just wondering if you have any examples of intergenerational living going the other way. So a younger couple or younger people looking for a senior to either offer, like, lend out an olive branch, lend out a helping hand, or a companionship, or like anything like that. I don't know. And how does it toe the line of making sure they're not bringing in a senior to in some way take advantage of them? Does that ever happen?
Take advantage of. Unfortunately, you know, as I mentioned earlier on in the conversation, I'm not an expert. I haven't seen those examples. It definitely can happen. I mean, we hear about elder abuse all along the line, and it takes so many different forms. I mean, that can happen, you know, within families as well. But on a positive note, in terms of the reverse situation, you have the University of Yukon is the first example that I found where they brought Indigenous elders and or Indigenous families onto campus and are living there. And it's so enriching. Well, first of all, the university I was reading some articles and I was just blown away. The university is reaching out to elders, you know, further out in the community and making this offer. And what I loved about this practice is they reached out to the elder. Would you be interested in coming and living here? And what would you like to do? They didn't say, we want you to be here to do this, 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 and that. What do you want to do here? And how do you want to be involved in the community? So, and we found that with intergenerational practice in any forms is involving the different cohorts in the process and allowing them to sort of determine how they want to participate is huge. It's huge. But I guess, sorry, Andrew, I really didn't answer your question. It can happen. This is why sometimes the intermediaries are good. Not sometimes, why they're good, because one of the things that some of them do, and this is where research would have to be done, is that they, what do? They check in. They do regular check-ins.
Right. I was just asking because I think that it's although it's probably more common than not, but a misconception that seniors are the ones that have a home and looking for young people to come rent a room off them, when sometimes we've heard in our experiences that there's sometimes seniors who are in need of a place and young people might have a spare room who can offer that. And if there's a program going the reverse way, that could be an interesting way of linking.
You know, that's an absolutely wonderful idea. I mean, we've participated in some programs where we brought older adults into, let's say, daycares. And, you know, a lot of the families probably came from elsewhere, and even the older adults that were participating. So they really didn't have much, if any, contact with the other generations. And, you know, as the weeks went on of the older adults going in weekly and doing their thing, again, they decided, the daycare asked them what they wanted to do, but going in and doing their thing, it built a stronger and stronger community. The parents were coming earlier to pick up the kids so they can connect with the older adults. The kids were thrilled when the older adults were coming in, and it really and it just built that community, made it stronger and more interactive, and and you know how caring daycares are. This daycare became even, it was just even more exceptional. They did a tea party and they invited older adults from the broader community to come in and participate.
I think on that note, very positive note, we're going to wrap up because we're at that time. Tracie, thank you once again. It was marvelous. We certainly, I was filled with a lot of interest and motivation and I think hope, because I think there are opportunities if people seize them that they could make it a win-win situation for both sectors. I just want to remind everybody that you will be getting a link for the recording in about a week's time. The Survey Monkey is that going to be put in the chat box, but you'll also get a copy of that. We ask you to take the 2-3 minutes, complete it. We need that information back. So when you get the link of the recording, please complete the evaluation. And also, we're all going to be taking a well-deserved break. Seniors Action Quebec will still be functioning, but the webinars will resume around January the 20th. And so keep an eye for newsletters and mailings, posters that will be sent out to you to remind you. And so January, February, March, we have a whole series of webinars coming up. Hope you will join us for that. And some of you I will be speaking to, maybe even seeing. So I wish everybody a great winter, great holiday, and thank you for joining us and have a good weekend.
Thank you very much for organizing this.
Thank you.